And one of the things that I have come to just to realize over the past couple of years, really, I have been serving in this role for, it'll be 5 years this July, and the event that Pastor spoke about is called Celebrate. And we still have our Celebrate event, and in fact it is, again, it's in July, and I believe it's on the 10th and the 11th of July this summer. And it's an open event, so if anybody, if you all wanted to come down and see what Pastor's talking about, it is a pretty powerful event where you can just see the work of God in the lives of people who have just experienced that freedom from the bondage of addiction. And it's definitely an exciting event, kind of a festival type of style. On a Friday night there's a service, and then all day long on Saturday it is sort of a outdoor festival with music and speakers. And in the evening on that Saturday we have a graduation ceremony, and you can see some of the folks who actually complete the program walk across the stage, they get their medallions, and afterwards we have a concert with a really, really nice fireworks display. It is definitely an event worth going to.
Amen.
Yes, I want to go.
Me too.
I just spilled a little water on myself. So, again, that's the 10th and 11th of July, which I think will be fun.
Where's this located?
Down at the Teen Challenge down in Rardsburg. So I'm sure we can get the information for you all if you want to come down. And I know I'm Facebook friends with a number of you too, so you'll be able to see it on there as well. Sometimes churches will get a van of folks, sometimes they'll get a bus, whatever you want to do. It's worth coming to. And I would say if you picked a day to come to, I would probably come on the Saturday event if you were going to bring a group. But anyways, one of the things that I've learned over the past couple of years is the topic of stigma, and that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. Stigma, and when it comes to addiction, is a very, very serious thing, and I have noticed in the secular community and faith-based community that I personally think that stigma and the ability to talk about stigma is harder and worse in the church than it is in the secular community, which is very interesting. And I've been able to see this dynamic now for, like I said, a couple of years. I am part of the Berks County Opioid Coalition, and I was able to give a very similar talk to a bunch of clinicians and folks who work in the secular treatment field in the surrounding area where we're at. And then the other day, on Friday, I was actually given an opportunity to speak at Penn State University on the Berks County campus, and another very similar type of talk. So I told Pastor, I said, I've had two shots now, I'm kind of practicing the same talk. But it's really interesting because as I talk to people in the church, people don't understand how to talk about addiction. It's very interesting, and I just find that to be it's a big challenge and it's a burden for me. I've talked with our county agencies about working on some sort of a stigma reduction campaign between the secular and faith communities down in our area, because it's such a challenge for both groups to work together for some reason. And I find myself in the middle of it all the time, which I actually really enjoy. But the topic is stigma, and I'm going to use a text from the story of the Good Samaritan. A couple questions I would say is, the first question is, who is your neighbor? Who is your neighbor? That would be the question for me. And I think when it comes to the topic of stigma in this story of the Good Samaritan, we'll be able to see some interesting dynamics of how people dealt with this person who was really beaten up and robbed. But I want to then talk about stigma when it comes to individuals that come through programs such as ours, but then also from a family perspective, because understanding it from an individual that's in it, but then also understanding the family that's dealing with addiction, there's also a ton of stigma that's associated there as well. And the thing to remember is that our identity is as people created in the image of God. We're not things. So when we identify people as things like addicts, junkies, alcoholics. We're actually placing, that becomes the identity of the person who's struggling with addiction. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But our organization, I was here, was it a year ago? I guess it was about a year ago, and I talked more about our program. But again, just as a reminder to the services that we offer, we have a medically monitored detox program for people who are really struggling with physical dependence. So if somebody has an alcohol issue or opioids or benzodiazepines, and they're really got a hold on them and they need a withdrawal management program, we can help with that. We are contracted with these areas, so we can provide assistance. Following that, we have a shorter-term clinical counseling program that also is a great resource. And then our long-term faith-based program, which is the main reason for why we do what we do as an organization, and it's the main reason why I'm standing here in front of you, is because of the discipleship program we have. But then another sort of wraparound service to that even is we have an outpatient organization that we acquired last year. So now we have what we would call a full continuum of services for people who are struggling with addiction.
Amen.
And one of the really important things to note, and many of you already know this, addiction is not only an individual challenge. It's a challenge that impacts the entire family. And that is something that we also take very seriously. So folks who are in our programs also have an opportunity to have their families be with us on a monthly basis, and we provide family trainings, and we work with families as individuals go through our programs. And that's hugely important. But getting to the text, which is in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 37, and I'm really just going to point a couple things out here. I'm not going to go too far into this text. But I think the main point of the story is asking that question, who is your neighbor? And I'll read it for you. And I'm reading, I believe, I'm reading out of the English Standard Version, so it's a little different than the version you have. This narrative or the story will still be the same story. So it says, and behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And he answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? And Jesus replied with this story. It says, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest, think of this, a priest, was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So a priest is walking down the street, he sees this guy, so he's on the same side of the road as him, he decides to cross the road and walk down. Why? I wonder why. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? He said, The one who showed mercy. And Jesus said to him, You go and do likewise. So the question I ask is, who is my neighbor? How should we treat our neighbor? What if our neighbor has a challenge that's associated with addiction? What if it's the parents or the spouse of someone who's struggling with addiction? I think that text that gives us, sorry, I keep getting that booming bass sound. Are you hearing it too?
Keeps us awake.
Yes, kind of shock you. Don't fall asleep. It's a pretty picture. It's a pretty clear picture that this neighbor can literally be anybody. If we're walking down the street in this story, are we looking and then crossing the road and going down? Or maybe we're on the other side and we just keep going. Or can we be like this person who is that Good Samaritan that does he know this person? I mean, I don't know. It doesn't seem like he knew who this person was. But what was going through people's minds when they were seeing this? You know, I think it's interesting to ask, like, did they pass by? Was he homeless? Did they think that this is a homeless person that I'm walking by? Did they think that this person had a problem with alcohol or something, and they had lost their mind and they decided to go across? What were they thinking as they walked by this man who was robbed and he was beaten? Think of it. What could have caused them to just see somebody like by themselves and just keep going, unless they were associating something with them to make them not want to talk to them? What happened? What was going on there? But think about the Good Samaritan. Think about this person that didn't even consider those things. I think that's really important to note, because he didn't think the worst of whoever that person was. He just decided to do something and act. And that's kind of what I feel when I'm in this room with you all, that you seem like a bunch of people who want to act and want to do something and not sit around. You just seem like that type of people to me when I hear you worshiping and just hear you, the way you communicate and relate to one another. But I think as I think about the topic of stigma, it's a serious, serious problem in society, and I believe that we need to face it head on and help change the way we think about people who have challenges and see them as having been created in the image of God, who have inherent dignity and rights as God's creatures.
Amen.
So what would okay, I'm just making sure everybody's okay. Is my wife getting off something? I know we've had sick kids here for a week or two. What I want to start off with, and I kind of just want to work through this concept, because this is a really big deal, and I just know from seeing it now for a couple of years that I want to start off by just defining what I'm talking about when I'm talking about stigma. And this is on the group I mentioned that I'm part of, the Opioid Coalition in Berks County. It's called SOS Berks, and they have a really good definition right on their website of what is stigma. And it says stigma is defined as a set of negative beliefs that a group or society holds about a topic or group of people. According to the World Health Organization, stigma is a major cause of discrimination and exclusion, and it contributes to the abuse of human rights. When a person experiences stigma, they are seen as less than because of their real or perceived health status. Stigma is rarely based on facts, but rather on assumptions, preconceptions, and generalizations. Therefore, its negative impact can be prevented or lessened through education. It's a really good definition. I really like that. So what I did here in this little case study, if you call it that, is I then took this definition and I went to our folks who work with us, and a young lady who graduated our discipleship program, but has now been working with us for a number of years and is actually one of our associate directors now. I asked her, I said, help me understand how do we as an organization, what are some of the results from when you talk to folks? Tell me what they're saying on an individual basis, and then tell me what the family is feeling the same way from being stigmatized because of addiction. So here's a couple of quotes. Let's see if I can do this without spelling myself this time. As a person in long-term recovery for roughly 6 years, I would say that the stigma associated with substance use is still alive and well. When I share my story or pieces of my experience with certain groups of people, I can sense that they are not as accepting as others. I've watched their body language and even the way they have treated me change in an instant, and at times can make me feel that I do not have the same opportunities or worth as others. I will say that I have seen somewhat of a change over the years in how people react toward or respect a person in recovery. I cannot tell you if it's because I am more educated on how to handle situations like this, or if it's because people are becoming more aware due to the epidemic that is ravaging our area. My hope is that it's a little bit of both. I believe some current students in our program are reluctant about their future careers and their next steps once they leave here as our organization. Because some people will always see them as the person they once were. And if they are not strong enough, the opinions of others may cause them to relapse. So how are we, as a people, making people feel when we're talking about the topic of addiction? How many of us just don't really know how to talk about it? I've been in churches where people just, they kind of like stop and they're like, the people, addict. And they don't know how to, you just don't know how to do it. And that's okay, and that's why I think that's why I'm really talking about this today. Here's from our family program. I would say 30%, as a rough guess, of the families I work with have told me how grateful they are for resources like our family programming department, because they feel too shameful and embarrassed to talk to their friends, coworkers, and even other family members about what their son or daughter are going through, which could easily be a spouse or it could be a parent. They fear that they won't understand or that they will see the family or individual in a totally different light. This type of stigma has also delayed the family's response in getting their loved ones help. So they continue to enable, not create boundaries, and sweep things under the rug because of their fear, which in return has created an unhealthy family system that has the potential to continue for generations to come.
That's right.
So it's not just the individual, it's also the family. And it might even be worse for the family than the individual. I'm not sure. But as we are thinking about talking about addiction, then there's other people who are around that are the family members of whoever that person is. And many times their fear causes them to not talk about it, about their loved one, because of being rejected or being judged by other people. It's a very real story. So I know I shared some of my story when I was here before, but I wrote down a couple of things just to make you, I really thought through this, and it's how can I describe the way that I was feeling when I was the person who had that physical dependence on opioids, and then my life had just gone into a place of shambles, and it was a total mess. A couple of the thoughts I wrote down here were, my identity was without worth and less than human. To understand that or to feel that, you can only, I think, understand it if you've felt it before. But I accepted my status as a so-called addict, or whatever other descriptive term that could be one of these derogatory terms to refer to somebody who is dealing with addiction. I was too ashamed to admit my failures, even though it was evident to everyone else. If you've seen it, you know it when you see it. The concept, and this is a really important one, the concept of hiding in, quote, the shadows was absolutely true, and maybe one of the main reasons why people who are really deep in addiction only come out at nighttime. You ever wonder that? When do you just think about it when you're younger, if you're going into certain bad areas, when are you not supposed to go? At nighttime. Well, people who are, quote, hiding in the shadows are hiding from the fear of addressing addiction. And they are hiding in the sense of they don't want you to know, even though you probably know. They want to hide. They hope that you don't see it. And as you're hiding and hiding more, what's happening is that person's going down and down and down until they die. So how can we help people not hide in the shadows? How can we do that? Well, it's by treating them as human beings that have a problem. That's one of the most important things that I could tell you. And I've seen this, and I have seen people who have gone through this, and they've gone through a positive process of change. Something happens, they relapse, then they hide in the shadows, and they're dead. Lots of them. We can play a part in helping to make that better. I knew I couldn't hold a job, and I wasn't willing to seek help. I gave up on life and simply accepted the status of being hopeless. And hopeless is like the saddest place. When you just give up and just say, you know what? This is just what I am. I am that thing that people are identifying me as, and I'm just going to live that way for the rest of my life, and just, it is what it is, and just give up hope. It's a very, very horrible and sad place to be. But I can tell you, As a person who has been in lots of trouble, who has gone through a process it's in a long-term process of recovery, has been freed from that bondage of addiction, one thing I would have never told you back then was that the legal system was what helped me to get sober. And that's where I found myself, quote, willing to get help. And they weren't helping me in the sense of, hey, Kris, you might want to go to treatment. They were putting handcuffs on me and throwing me in jail. Which, for some of us, when you know that you're going to be in that place, that God will use what He's got to use to get us into a place of, first, to get us sober. Let's just get the substances out of our body before we start thinking about anything else. And for me, I had the long, painful process of doing that in several county jails. Monroe County, I've been there and have a couple of those t-shirts in the closet along with many other places. But I found, and this is important when it comes to the process of accessing treatment, that's another one of the major barriers when dealing with addiction. Not only is there this stigma associated with just, hey, I'm willing to try and get help, and we as a church, we're learning how to talk about it, but then accessing treatment is a whole other challenge that many people have. You just say things like, well, what do I do? Who do I call? And you have me as a resource, and we have worked with some of the folks that are even here along with the area. But leverage from the legal system and family was good, and it eventually helped me to access treatment. See, the thing that I always try to emphasize to people is that I was willing. I didn't want to go. I had no motivation to go, except I didn't want to go to jail anymore, and I was just simply like, I'll give it a shot. The process where the court helped me was they helped stop that process of hitting what we quote call rock bottom. Rock bottom for many people has equated to many, many lost lives. I used to give this statistic that between 2000 and 2014, so we're talking a number of 14 years there, that our country had seen 500,000 overdose deaths. But then if you go from just 2015, 16, and 17, and you're somewhere right in the 2018 range, there's now 750,000 or more at that point. So you're talking, you all see this on the news, you're seeing 70,000 a year dying of overdose deaths. Well, if you think about it, it took 14 years to get to 500,000. If you do the math, compared to the 70,000 a year now you can get to 500,000 in just a couple, 7 years? That is a serious, serious problem. So we don't want rock bottom. We want to leverage whatever we can. And the way we leverage it is by understanding how to talk about it, how to get people access to treatment, and then we actually get them to where we can raise that bottom so they don't die. Super important. So a couple learning points, and I'm getting close here. I really had to think a lot about this and write a lot of these things down and make it concise, because it's really hard to think through the feelings of hopelessness, but then it's also really fun to think through the freedom side of having read this portion of my life. Because I have been sober since 2006. So we're talking, we're going on, I've got enough days now where I can talk to people where they will usually give me the credibility of saying, okay, you've got a decade plus of time, and also having all that time, I've seen thousands and thousands of people who have come through our care in our organization to just have some of these thoughts here. But my learning points as a person, being free from substances for 13, 14 years now, I have come to see, and this is very important, that hope is real. Hope is real. You have to know hope is real. I have come to see that my life and life in general has lots and lots of worth. That's an important piece to know. I've learned to stop using some of the words that I would have once identified myself as. Those words like an addict. Some people would call somebody an alcoholic or a junkie, a dope fiend, whatever it is. I don't use those words anymore. I've rid those words from my vocabulary. I don't say those words at all. And it's very, very hard. If you go home and you start to think about this, and you jot these down for the next year, how many times you say those words, you'll probably be surprised, because it just comes up when you don't know how to talk about certain things. And it's taken me years, and I'm still not perfect at it. Every once in a while, I'll still say the word addict, and I'll say, oh my goodness, how did I do that? And I can do it in this context to say that I don't like to do it, so that doesn't count. But I've learned to say things, and I don't think these things are games of semantics. I really don't think these are games of semantics, because I really believe that if we can see that people hide in no shadows, and the way we identify them causes fear to come out, then it's a real thing. And whatever we can do to help to minimize that by stopping those types of words, then we should really do it. But I've learned to start saying things like person with a substance use disorder, a person with a challenge. I say a person with an alcohol use disorder. I talk about having a substance use problem or drug misuse. I talk about being a person in recovery, a person in long-term recovery. Those are very, very important things to say. And I was saying to a couple folks before the service, it's the same way if you think about it. If somebody smokes cigarettes their entire life and get lung cancer, we don't typically walk around and call that person Cancer Man. Has anybody ever heard anybody called Cancer Man? No, you don't. And you say, here's a person that has worth, who has a disease, they have cancer. So when you think about it in that way, or somebody that can get maybe type 2 diabetes or something from eating poorly, we don't walk around and call that person Diabetes Man. We say that they have a disorder, they have a problem, they have something that still identifies them as human. So when it comes to addiction, if we want to be able to positively impact the community, well, we can start referring to people with an addiction. People. Not identifying somebody as a thing. Because that causes fear in the person who needs the help. And we all can agree that we don't want them to die. That's one common goal that I know that all of us in this room has. We don't want to see people dying from overdose deaths anymore. So how can we play, just even if it's just a small role in putting a dent in this epidemic by just simply the way that we talk to people? Or maybe we can be like that Good Samaritan, and when I say that, who is my neighbor? It can be anyone. So we want to have our hearts postured in a way that's ready to help and bring positivity into the local community. What is our heart postured like right now as we think about these people? And we think about anybody who's going through homelessness or addiction, the stigma associated with anything. I mean, I talked with Tony, the stigma associated with the topic of abortion, or the stigma associated with whatever topic that you could think of. There's stigma and fear that's tied to all of these things. So when I ask that question, who is my neighbor? When we look at this story of the Good Samaritan, we can clearly see that it's anyone. That there's anybody. There is no specific person. When you walk by somebody, when you go to the gas station this afternoon, and you can say, who is my neighbor? Well, if somebody's dealing with something like this, well, it's you. So just a closing thought here, and this is something that I have said now on numerous occasions in interviews. I did a television show with Tony, or a radio interview with the the Pastors Network. And here's just a thought that I've really been grabbing a hold of, and I think it's super important. It's regarding human dignity. And I read this part here. I wanted to kind of just read it word for word to let you know that when I was at this opioid coalition with all these secular people from Berks County and surrounding counties, it's not necessarily what you would consider a church event. You follow me? This was not necessarily a room filled with faith-filled people. But this is what I read to them. And you know what I got when I was done this? And I'll tell you, I got a big amen out of the entire room. We're talking like 100 people that are in this room that are secular clinicians. And here's what I said to them. Genesis 1:27. And I read the text to them. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. And I looked up and got a couple looks, and people wondering, where's he going with this? But I said, in my life, As a person of faith, I've come to embrace the idea that God assigns worth and dignity to humanity. The concept of dignity, it transcends human thoughts of human worth. Let me say that one again. The concept of dignity, it transcends human thoughts of actual human worth. It's very important to know. Therefore, we have no right to judge the worth of another person because we don't have the right to assign our opinion of human worth. Because you know why? That's God's job.
Amen.
So just keep going. Give me 1 second. I read this to these people. I'm telling you, word for word. When it comes to substance use disorder, we must do the right thing, allowing and even encouraging people suffering the opportunity to identify themselves as a person with worth. And when we do this, we are on the right track for promoting life and what I refer to as wholeness. So I read that exact thing to them. So let's care for and honor others, and we can all play an active role in reducing the stigma associated with addiction. So that is my closing comment. I want to thank you all for the opportunity. I hope this was a little bit helpful for some of the things that I'm seeing in the community at large and in the church. And I hope that you can take this message with you and that you too can join me in the process of helping reduce the stigma of addiction. Yes.